We talked about how in general Torah and Mitzvahs have something over Ma has something over Torah and Mitzvahs. And then we explained what that was. The Ma is lower because it requires the Torah Mitzvahs to arouse it. But the Torah Mitzvahs are lower because the whole purpose of them, and their whole existence, is merely to arouse the Ma of the Neshama. So each one has something going. And then we sort of went to a different direction altogether. And we started bringing in words from Ayin Beis, explaining that the real difference between Sovev and Mamale starts in their source before the Tzimtzum, where you also have something called the source of Mamale Kolomim and the source of Sovev Kolomim. And that is that the source of Mamale Kolomim is called the Esser Spheres Haganuzos. There's 10 potential hidden spheres there, to completely hidden, and therefore completely in a state of potential, not actual. And also you have above that the source of Sovev, which is something which is not relevant spheros at all. And the difference between them is that the light of Sovev there, the source of Sovev, it's only shining from Hashem, not to shine to anybody else, just to reveal Himself. Whereas the Kavana of the 10 spheres HaGanuzos is to shine from Hashem in order to shine up something else. And even though they're still in a state of, before the Tzimtzum, there's nothing else to shine up, and therefore there's nothing, the spheros are hidden. In other words, which means that there's no real limitation in existence yet, which could effectively shine up some limited entity. Nor is there any limited entity because it's before the Tzimtzum, so it's all theoretical. And therefore he brings a point that it's all still davuk to the etzem, it's still clinging to the etzem, and etzem-like. So if it's etzem-like and davuk to the etzem, how is it that it's limited? So we said that in the etzem itself there's a kavana for limitation in order to shine into a would-be limited world. So this is called the source of Sov and the source of Mamale. Follow all that?
Is there a distinction between the etzem and the Ein Sof?
Not really.
Not really?
No. Okay. So, that being said, we're going to go on to Os Vav. Mavar Ba'amaimer. So the Rebbe Rashav continues in Ayin Beis. This is now in Perek Mem Tes. If you look at the bottom, the Mashal al Zeh B'kochos HaNefesh Sheba'adam, that we can have a mashal for all this wild lights that we were just talking about inside of man. It's what's called the Kochos HaNefesh, the powers of the soul. B'sari Echze Elokah, as it says in Sefer Iyov, and it's brought oftentimes as sort of like a demonstration of what Hasidus is really all about, is that from my flesh I can see God. Right? That you can see everything in the whole Seder Ishtalshus and beyond the Seder Ishtalshus inside of the mashal of man. So where do we see this in our flesh, so to speak? So hu achiluk ben haratzon l'shar hakochos. So in general, this is the difference between the will and the rest of the kochos. Right? What are the rest of the kochos besides the will?
Like the intelligence, the seichel, like the heart. Like
the seichel and the midos. Very good.
Right.
Exactly.
Is that the heart?
The heart is the midos.
The
Right?
Ratzon, Seichel, and Midos are
The 3 categories, you could say. You have the Ratzon, which is, we're going to see is referring to basically the Kesser of the soul. It's not really one of the Spheros, it's above the Spheros. And then you have the 10 powers of the soul, the other Kochos of the soul, the 10 powers, from Chochmah down to Malchus of your own soul. In general, that can be divided into Seichel and Midos. Right? So Shara Kochos here just officially goes on all the other powers of the soul besides the will. 10 spheros of the soul. And he said this, that all the powers invest themselves into the limbs of the body, the Shara Kochos, the rest of the powers besides the will. Right? I guess I have to, a little caveat, even though it's the 10 soul powers, we're sticking with that, but those 10 soul powers really break down into literally all the powers of the body, the power of eyesight, hearing, speech, digestion, all other powers that the soul bears is basically some type of extension of the 10 kochos of the soul, the basic intellect, emotion, and, emotion, I guess you could say, is chesed, gevurah, and tiferes. You get into your lower powers of netzach, hod, yesod, that gets sort of like basically spiritually you're going lower down into Malchus. It basically it also fills in the whole physical body as well. So all these powers, like basically from Chokhmah and down, they invest themselves into the body. Right? In other words, each one of them has a place where it gets lodged into your physical goof, and it actually joins with the flesh in such a way that the flesh becomes a kli for the light. And this is, your brain holds intellect, your eyes hold eyesight. This we're going to see in a second. It doesn't happen with the will. But all the other powers, it works like that they invest themselves into the limbs of the body.
How? Like emotions hold the heart.
The heart holds emotions, exactly. They're in your body.
The brain holds the... Yeah.
Dugmas or hamamale shemislavish bolamos. And this is the exact example we have inside of ourselves, an exact example of what's called or mamale. If you want to ever think about what is or mamale, from my flesh I can see God, that you have something called or mamale, that a light contracts itself to be comparative with the vessels, and it actually enters into those vessels and joins with them, becomes one with them. So that's the rest of the powers. Ratzon hu makif es kol evri aguf b'shaveh. And the will, on the other hand, you don't have a kli for the will. There's no place in the body that holds the will exclusively, right? It's not like your power of action goes into your hand. The will is not found in the brain. It's not found in the heart. It's not found in the hand. Even though all those things, the will moves through, right? The will is actually found everywhere, but simultaneously it's not found anywhere in particularly. See what I'm saying by that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's called makif. That's the definition of makif. Et kol evri haguf b'shav. It equally surrounds, i.e. permeates in a way that none of them are actually able to access it, but it can access all of them. Equally, v'dugma sovev. And this is the exact example of sovev kolomi. Sovev kolomi is everywhere, and yet it's not anywhere. It's not like, if you go here, you'll find sovev kolomi, right? But at the same, it's like the will. It's underlying every single thing, and nothing can move a muscle unless the will strikes it and tells it to open your eye or open your brain. But when you open your brain and use your brain, you're using intellect, not will, right? It's just the will is sort of engendering that whole experience at every second, because without the activation of the will, none of the powers work, right? So the will is actually found in every single place in your body. There's not a place in your body that doesn't have will. Right? And there's a lot of Hasidus describing how the fact that you don't have to sort of send your will from one place to another place. Like if you want to move your hand, there's no need to send will from the mind to the hand. Right? There may be a need to send instructions of how to move the hand and train the hand. Let's say if you're a piano player, that doesn't come purely from the will. That comes from the mind, which basically invests itself into the hand to know how to work the hand with intelligence. Nonetheless, none of that will go anywhere and go on unless the will, which is already in the hand, it exists everywhere, activates and tells the brain to move the brain in the hand to move the hand. The brain which has invested itself into the hand, the intellect which has invested itself into the hand to now move the hand. You understand what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
So the will is everywhere.
So this is a dogma for the rest of...
For Hashem, right? In other words, when you're looking at anything in the world, the solar system, a blade of grass moving through the thing, moving in the wind, what you're seeing is the blade of grass, which is the kli. What you're seeing inside of the blade of grass is that it's alive. That's the or mamali that's invested into it. But the fact that it's going to move somewhere, or anything's going to happen, is because there's an unseen force which is everywhere, which is actually responsible for moving it and making everything go around, right? And basically it's the underlying will of God inside of everything. You can't see it directly, but you can see its effects. Because the fact is that anything is doing anything, obviously something willing that to happen. But just like a person, when you see him hit a tennis ball, you don't see his will. You see his arm and you see the ball, right? You see the chitzonius thing. But it's ke'ilu, you can make out, obviously there's a will inside of there, which is responsible for everything that you do see, is the underlying soul that when you look at a person, you can't see it directly, but you can see it indirectly. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, but we obviously belong to this massive canvas, right? Where
Sure.
when I move my hand, it's still Hashem's will. So how do we understand
Mhm.
like our will and
Versus His will? Beautiful. So this is kind of crazy. Do you want the answer to this one?
Yeah.
His will.
Write it down.
You're basically he just like you have two wills. He has two wills. He has the will to make everything else except for Torah and mitzvahs happen, and he has the will to make Torah and mitzvahs happen, which is really his innermost panemius will. Right? So you don't really have a free choice in the normal sense that you think about it, because anything that's going to be willed, it's going to be his will. It's just your free choice is basically to choose between the will of the animal soul, which should you choose that one, or actually it's basically leaving it without choice. If you just leave it without doing anything, the animal soul's will is the one who's going to be operational. And it's really not your private animal soul's will. The will inside of you is Hashem's will that's moving through you, right? And it's willing you to experience this will of going here and there. But this is the crazy thing about man, basically. You can switch gears, and you can decide to be reverberating on a higher level of godly will, which means you can tap into another will, which is also like not your will. It's like it's the desire of Hashem. The only thing is you can move into that track and let the desire of Hashem be your will, and all of a sudden, again, you're not like really choosing the event. If you're going to move your arm like this, you're going to move your hand like that, because the mitzvah is the mitzvah. It's His will to do the mitzvah. It's Him doing it, in fact, not you. It's just that you can move into that domain where you're now a chamber for the divine will instead of His worldly will. So that's your free choice right there. Jumping back and forth, or hopefully not jumping too much, between basically allowing the regular will of God, who runs the worlds, to conduct you, or the higher will of God, which is beyond the worlds, to conduct you through Torah and mitzvahs.
Where is like Hashem, like where is He like listening to us? Like like all this stuff is happening, and there's clearly this we're understanding this with our minds. There's like this well-coordinated machine going on, but like, is it all like conscious? Like this whole Sovev, like it's all connected to this one vision where like if someone hears something far away, it can make something else happen far away, and like
I didn't get the last part, but yeah, it's basically
like if something happens in one place, then it can create like a chain effect.
the butterfly effect.
Something like around the world, like how like I think that like the child thinks of Hashem as just being like something that like hears Him all the time and like makes things happen. But as we're breaking this down into like these specifics and organizing this into like, well, like, you know, the dogma of like the Sovev with the body is very much like the way that Hashem like performs everything.
Right.
So like
how does He get like messages from us?
How is that like connected to us in like a personal way, as opposed to just like the teva of everything just working? Like how is that like changing like
you basically
like,
you have
Zulatova's like experiences?
I'm not sure if I really understand what you're trying to get out of me here.
Like
they are Hashem's ears.
Like how does He like understand? Like I know that's like, I mean, all these questions are gonna be like silly questions because it's like trying to make sense of something that's like.
No, it's not. It's not. I mean, I just don't know exactly what you're asking. But like, how Hashem hear? Like, where is His ears, basically?
Yeah, like where are His ears?
So basically, it's everywhere. In other words,
where is His seichel? Like,
he's basically.
But it's too simple to just say everywhere. Like I can't communicate with everywhere. Like it's.
Well, no. In other words, what's happening is that
where's our kavanah going?
It's there's an underlying force inside of everything,
mm-hmm.
right? Where the manifestation of that. See, there's this whole thing about you have to really sort of meditate on these pictures that they're drawing all the time in our minds. We have these three different levels of lights, and then we have vessel, right? So we have basically the Sovev light, entirely not inside of vessels, right? And then we have the I guess there's two different types of lights that we're really dealing with right now. Then we have the Mamali light, right? What is the Mamali light? It's like a tiny, tiny ray of this Sovev, which is intended to it's inside of the Sovev, right? If you think about it like that, it didn't go out anywhere. So when Hashem needs to know it, he doesn't have to exit somewhere to go find out. He's already in it because it's inside of him, right? So then that light itself, it goes into a vessel, right? And the vessel itself like basically blocks the creation's ability to experience the light, but it doesn't stop the whole experience from being happening inside of Hashem. So in other words, but for him to know something, it's not like for us to know something. That at the first we don't know it, and then we have to go find it out, right? The whole thing is taking place inside of him. Not only does he know it automatically, he's making it. So his being is it. So like there is a communication, so to speak, between that aspect of himself which is vested inside of you, to that aspect of himself which is beyond, which is everywhere and everything, and the communication is like simultaneous, constantly, because it's not something that's not him. It's him that's just basically having a flow of communication between what's taking place inside of your body and like the ultimate will. I don't know if that answers the question. There's a mimer on this in like kind of as much detail. It's if it was really really clear in that mimer, I would be saying it right now. But it's a mimer called Erda Na in Torah Or, and it's what parsha is that in? I guess it's in maybe Chayisara. I'm not exactly sure what parsha it's in at this moment. Parshas Vayera, I think. Yeah, Parshas Vayera, Erda Na, and it talks about it's about the story of Sodom, and it talks about how Hashem is going to descend and see what's going on in Sodom to see if he's going to judge the city or not. And it's basically more or less your question. It talks about over there like the eyes of Hashem on the land. There's like 7 eyes sort of roaming around, seeing everything. And it discusses, but I think what you're trying to get into is like what's the communication between like that Orin Soph and the world that's presented by it. Why does he have to go down and see what's going on? And what is the meaning of that? Obviously he has not to go anywhere. Galoi v'yadua, everything is revealed and known before Hashem already. So what is this basically flow of information that's going back from the Soviv to the Mali all the time? First of all, it's instantaneous, but how does it work? What are the mechanics of it? So check out that mimer. That's the place where it's the sort of root of that conversation. I guess if you can look in the back of the book, you can see the Rebbe will show you different mimerim throughout Hasidus where the topic is discussed. But it's a fair question. It's complicated.
Right. Because we also we try to figure out like how. I mean, it's not really fair to like make sense of how. Maybe it is like, but like I guess like my thing is like part of it is like his like sensory input to information, and the other part is like his ability to like make decisions in like a seichel type of way. Like I'm curious how like information can be processed on such a level that's so beyond our understanding.
Okay, but I mean that's obviously God,
Right. But
so.
Well, no, it all kind of comes back to kavanah though. Like who do we like when we're davening and we're like saying Hashem's name, like
right.
who are we talking to?
The one. Why go to any intermediaries? Anything that you're going to, like, if it's Hashem's mind or it's Hashem's heart, or how much more so if it's like some being that Hashem created, since He is the being of all of them, why would you discuss anything with anyone but Him? So you just, when you're davening, you're davening to Atzmuso Muhuso, the essence of Hashem.
But you create in your own mind this own like image for your own self, and like every person creates like a different image.
No,
like,
but I mean, first of all, you don't have to have an image per se.
It's not like a picture, like.
So then it's
like
not
a
an
conceptual,
image.
It's like the Nefesh Ruach Neshama you're saying is communicating with the Betel Yed and the Chaya through like your heart and your brain. And it's emitting a frequency into the rest of the world, the material world, and the other beings that are also communicating with them and manifesting your reality depending upon the conversation that you're having between those 3 levels of the soul or the 5 levels of consciousness or something. Is that true? Is that what we're talking? Is it?
Sounds good. Yeah.
The Nefesh Ruach Neshama are like the intellectual capacities of a human being, which communicate on a subconscious and a superconscious level somehow with like Hashem's ears, like we were saying. I don't know, I'm like totally making this up as I go.
Okay.
Like that's the question that's somewhat said, right? Like when you're about your davening, that you just be davening. Hush it, like a child is, right? Like that's
That's the main kavanah.
That's the main kavanah. That should be the kavanah, not necessarily.
I mean, look.
That should be the kavanah.
In there's
when we're learning, we're
there's
learning
a
about these different
there's a mimer
aspects, right?
called what is it called? The mitzvah, the Surash Mitzvahs Tefillah. I think so. And basically, it's about all the specific Kabbalistic kavanas inside of every prayer, right? And like, which name of Hashem is found in this, which sphere is here, like, and in the middle of that, the Rabbi brings this sort of, he brings this often to prove the point that even in this like Kabbalistic sort of map of all the different levels and spots that you're trying to identify inside of the system of the Creator, at the end of the day, you should daven like a child. You should dive like a child who doesn't have any knowledge of any of these things and just basically is pointing to God. As simple as that, right? If you get caught up, it says you should go daven to Him and not to His midos, right? If you daven to His midos, like you're making a big mistake there. It's like going on like idol worship. That's why, in large measure, the Kabbalistic secrets were not really distributed to the previous generations, because if you get too excited about, Chochmah Bin and Das, like you're caught up in davening to characteristics and not to Him, who's beyond all these characteristics. So that's like a trap that could really take a person down if they misuse the Hasidic meditations. Obviously, it's not something we have to worry about too much, or they wouldn't have been given to us in this generation. The positives outweigh the negatives enormously, but we have to emphasize continuously, when you're davening, you're not davening to Chochmah or trying to draw down Gevurah, Chesed, like, don't get into it, You're davening to Hashem, the master of all the midos. Okay. Anyway, let's go back inside. We got a little bit sidetracked there. So, we're talking about the other powers which invest themselves into the body in a particular limb, versus the will that is in every place equally and does not invest itself. Right? It's just underlying and sort of like, it is there. So it's a strange thing to understand. This is the definition of sovev, though. It's a good way for a person to finally understand what is sovev. It doesn't mean surrounding, like it's not inside, right? It's everywhere, equally. But you can't see it. Right? So when you look at a person, you don't see their will. You can see their eyes. Right? You can see their actions, right? You can see a lot of things. You can even see their intellect if they're speaking. But you can't see their will, but none of those other things would be happening unless it was all from the will. And therefore it's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. This is sort of the definition of sovev. It's not perceivable. It doesn't project itself into a reality, but all reality comes from it. Who, after the parentheses, ki kol hakochos. It's because all the powers, gam lifnei shemislavshim be'ivri haguf, even before they come into the limbs of the body, hem metzias shemichutz la'nefesh. They are already a metzias, an existence which is, so to speak, outside of the soul. What we're talking about right now is the other powers of the soul, not the will. Okay? Why is it that they're able to go inside of your body and actually invest inside of a foreign entity? It's because even in their source, the source of the soul powers, the 10 powers, which is basically a metaphor here for the source of the 10 spheres in general, right? They already exist in their source in some way that they are not the soul itself. They are something that the soul bears inside of it, an entity other than the soul. Just like the 10 spheros, haganuzos, okay, are not the Orin Soph themselves in a sense. There's something that the Orin Soph bears inside of itself. There's something other than the Orin Soph. They're already the power of limitation inside of the unlimitedness, right? Now the oddity here, and this is truly the oddity of all oddities, is that nothing is outside of Hashem. What do you mean? Like going up into the source, you're saying there's like Hashem is alone, and all there is Him, and at the same time there's these 10 spheros floating around, right? It doesn't make any sense. Like there's nothing but Him. So in truth, this is like this weird marriage that we talk about of the existence of these things in a purely potential form. That the idea of many or gavul, right, like things, can exist inside of Hashem without blemishing His perfect unity, which is not something that man can understand in a true sense. We have to sort of just like go up as high as we can and sort of accept this phenomena, right? That you can have many. Hashem has not limited that He can be many, and yet this many does not in any way preclude Him from being simple one. Okay? And what is this called? It's called the 10 spheros haganuzos, right? 10 hidden spheros, that the presentation of these spheros, they're hidden, so they don't actually make a dent into His simple oneness. And it's the same thing with the soul powers. It's the same thing is true with you. You are one. Your soul is one. One entity, one identity. It's not made out of parts. You follow me? And yet, your soul bears these parts, these other things. That is not it. Inside of it, without that blemishing the simple oneness of your being, of your soul. Like, in other words, the thing we just said about God is also about you. You are many, and yet the many of you does not interfere with your being simply one. And we say many, I mean, think about it. You have an intellect, you have emotions, you have power of eyesight, you have all these different thingies, right? That are doing different jobs, that are all sort of totally in different worlds from each other. Hearing and seeing, they're not alike. Speaking and thinking, they're not alike. They're different, functions that you have. So the fact that they're really all one is odd, because they're not really one. They're in different universes from each other. Emotions and intelligence are two different things. Throwing a ball and thinking about philosophy, how is that one you? Right? They're in fact in the Greek sort of folly, they used to believe that the different parts of a person were coming from different places, just like they had different gods. The God that made the sun, the God that made the moonlight. They felt like they corresponded that to your own person. They were like very messed up people probably from this, but that they had like different entities ruling the different powers of their selves, because how could it all be one? It doesn't make sense. They were very rational. That if you have many, it's not one, right? In other words, unless you're Jewish, this doesn't make any sense, right? And if you're Jewish, it doesn't make any sense anyway. We just believe things that don't make sense, and somehow it makes the whole world work out better. But truly, if God's unity, they weren't denying. It's just that that's where things are one, and over here where things are many, things are many. You can't have it both ways. So it's really not like that. In other words, somehow the source of many is sitting comfortably inside the one. It's not one, but it's sitting there in such a way where it is one. It's one at that place, because they're in a state of complete concealment. It's called in the Lashon of Chassidus that the essence is nosei es hakochos. It carries the kochos. It's just kind of like a funny word. The kochos are bittul, they're nullified, they're a metzias, which is not a metzias. There's so many ways and languages to try and describe this phenomenon, because it's really almost impossible for us to picture it in our minds. How it can be there and not there at the same time. But the point is that just like this is true by Hashem and His 10 spheros, it's true also by your powers. The powers that eventually, see, we don't have this question when it comes to your will. When it comes to your will, since your will does not invest itself into any powers, it is just one. It's the part of you which is just one. We're going to get to this in a second inside the Mimer. But like conversely to all that language we just said, the will, it is the aspect of you which is one above, and therefore when it comes down and goes into your body, it stays one. That's why it doesn't climb inside of the different parts of your body. Because it's not separatable, right? It's not a multiplicity in any way. And therefore, even when it comes down into your body, it doesn't link into this division and multiplicity and like invest itself inside of the separateness, because it doesn't know from separateness. It's the revelation of your soul's oneness, not the revelation of your soul's ability to be many. And therefore, even when it comes down to the body, it doesn't fall for this thing where it goes into the limbs and gets all disjointed and becomes intellect or emotion or speech or eyesight. It doesn't do any of that. It stays purely one at every stage of your being. The will to move the eye, in other words, is the exact same will that it is to move your digestion, or to move a ball, or to think, right? the will doesn't have any distinctions or changes. It just activates, and then what it activates is that thing which is different, which is intellect. It gets activated from the will intellectually, and the thing which is emotion gets activated from the will emotionally, but the will does not have any of these types of categories inside of it. Wow. Because it's a reflection of the oneness of your soul, which doesn't know from differences. Let's see inside. So we're in the middle of like a long sentence. Let's go back to the beginning of the sentence and just sort of get clarity. So from the period, a few lines up. This that all the kochos invest inside the body's limbs, like or mamale that invest inside the world, and the will, which is makiv to all the limbs, equally, like or sovev, that doesn't invest inside the world, it's because all the kochos, gam lifnei shmislabshim be'evrei haguf, even before they come into the body, they're already a matzias michutz la'nefesh. They already exist as something other than the soul, even in their source. V'lechein, right? That's what we're saying, the 10 spheres haganuzos. V'lechein k'shnim shachim be'evrei haguf. Therefore, when they do finally come inside of the body, they get drawn down to a body, right? Where in other words, they're already existing before the body comes into the game, like 10 hidden spheros. They're already ready to go into a body. There's just no body. So therefore, by the time the body comes around, they get presented with the body, they can go inside of it. They're made for it. Hem mislavshim behem. They get invested into the body, just like we said, exactly like the Esther spheres haganuzos, the source of mamali. Whereas the ratzon, einu metzias la'atzmo, the ratzon has no existence of itself. The kol inyanu hu hatayas v'amshachas hanefesh. Its whole thing is just the leaning and the drawing out of the soul. Meaning what? Let's use the analogy of the Orin Soph. Remember we said there's a light called the Orin Soph, which is beyond the Esther spheres haganuzos. It's not there to be a thing in itself. It's not there to shine into somebody. Right. It's just the revelation of the essence. It has no existence other than what the essence existence is. It doesn't have a private life. It's not a thing. And so too is your will, right? It's not a thing. It has no existence of itself. It's your soul. It's the revelation of your soul. And therefore, since your soul is essentially one, it doesn't have distinctions. Its whole inyan is just the hamshacha of the soul itself into a certain place. And therefore, gam kashanimshach be'evrei haguf. Therefore, even when it does come down into the limbs of the body, einu mislavish behem. It doesn't enter into their private boundaries, because then it would not be like a faithful messenger of the soul. The soul is truly one. It's indivisible. And this is a revelation of the indivisible oneness of the soul. So if it would come down and then crawl into boundaries, it would show on itself that it is measured and finite. That's not a proper messenger of the soul. The soul is unmeasured, infinite. And therefore, even when it comes down into a finite place, it doesn't get caught in the limitations of the body. But it's there, but it's just sort of like beyond them all, like we said, like the Orin Soph that's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Okay, is everyone clear on this inyan?
Yeah.
So the mimer of the Ayin Beis, it goes on. Now we're in chapter 52. You see what the Rebbe is doing here is not normal, really. He's going through like pages and pages and pages of this very, very complex topic, and he's just doing it like in 2 or 3 lines, whereas it took like hundreds of lines to get these topics out of there. This is like a it's a piece of work over here. He goes on in the mimer, and he says, "Sha'al derech zehu ba'anim shalamayla." And just like we see in the body and the soul powers of the body, so too this is in the analog above. Hu achiluk shebein Torah lemitzvahs. This is the difference between Torah and mitzvahs. Okay, I'm just checking out this footnote. I think we covered it though, more or less. So he says, just like all that we just described, these 2 different levels, will and the other powers, which is really an analogy for Sovev and Mamale, this is the difference also between Torah and mitzvahs. The Torah, Shehi Chachmasu Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Torah is called the wisdom of Hashem. And the wisdom of Hashem is what? Metzias kiviyachol. It's like a thing. Right? In other words, there's Hashem and there's His wisdom. It's an entity, as it were. It's something other than Hashem. Right? So that represents, above, in Hashem, it represents the idea of the Esher Spheres HaGanuzos. Right? It's like Torah comes in sort of like a measured way. Right? That it has a certain, need to be, ability to be grasped and internalized. That's reminiscent of the mamale light, right? That ultimately it can come inside of something and be grasped by something. It's an entity, as it were. So even in its source, even though it's one with God, just like the Esher Spheres HaGanuzos, it already has a certain level of ready-made limitation inside of it. Chokhmah, right? It's a sphera. It's like the other powers. Hamshachas lamata ba'adam halomda. Therefore, when it comes down below into the person that learns it, he bepanimius. It has the ability to invest into kelim. Just like all these other analogies that we said. When it's above the Esher Spheres HaGanuzos, before the Tzimtzum, so it's equally infinite. It's like the drop of water which is in the rest of the ocean, indistinguishable. But it's tailor-made that when you'll make a Tzimtzum, it already has an implicit division inside of it, so that when the ability to go into vessels appears, it's able to go into the vessels. This is Torah. It's drawn down into the person who learns it in a panemius, because even in its source of sources, it's like limitation hidden inside of infinity. As it says, the pasuk, "V'sorascha b'soch me'ai," that your Torah is in my bowels. It's like, in other words, we can digest Torah, right? It's in my intestines, because it's just like food. Torah is also called food, as opposed to mitzvahs, which are called garments, which you don't ingest, right? They surround you. Food is the idea of an or panimi, that you can bring it in, it nourishes you, it goes inside, you digest it, you break it down, just like concepts. Whereas the mitzvahs, Shem Ratzona Elyon, mitzvahs represent not chokhmah and down, but they represent will, because what is the mitzvah? The will of Hashem. What is the Torah? The wisdom of Hashem. So you see, this is already the difference between sort of the other powers, the 10 spheres, which are called Eser Kochos, starting with wisdom, versus the will, which is in Keser, right, which is this union of Sovev. This is the mitzvahs. They're called the will of Hashem, Ratzon Elyon. So now when you get to the mitzvahs, also we find, by the way, there's a difference. Just like we're saying in general, will is indivisible, or the Orin Soph is indivisible, whereas the Esher Spheres HaGanuzos, right, or the powers of the soul, they're divisible, and they all go into their finite places. There's measure between high and low. We also find by Torah, the obligation of learning Torah is not equal to everybody. Right? Someone who's a businessman, he can be yotzi his obligation if that's all the time he has with Perek Shachris and Perek Arbis. He can learn a little bit in the morning, a little bit at night. He could be equally as yotzi his Torah obligation as someone who doesn't have any job, who has to learn all day long without stopping. Right? So we already see, whereas when it comes to mitzvahs, no person is more obligated in mitzvahs than less. There's an equal obligation of every single mitzvah on every person. Right? So we see that there's divisions in Torah. There's also divisions in sort of like the Torah itself. There's many, parts of Torah. Torah is all about being like divided into parts. Whereas the mitzvahs are just kacha, right? You do the mitzvah. If you leave any part out of the mitzvah, you miss the entire mitzvah. You have to have the wholeness of the mitzvah. Whereas if you understand Torah and you're working on this mimer and you only understand, let's say, Os Hey, and Os Vav is beyond your comprehension, you did Os Hey. You got Os Hey and you've grasped it. You've learned the Torah of Os Hey. Whereas if you want to do a mitzvah, if you do the whole thing except you leave out one part, you didn't do the mitzvah at all. Because it's totality. It comes as an undifferentiated package of oneness. It can't break up into parts in the same way that Torah can. Because it comes from the makif, which is a light, which is indivisible. The will. And what is the will? Giloi ha'atzmus. As we're saying, like it's not the aspect of Hashem who's intending to shine to an other, which is the Esher Spheres HaGanuzos. It's the aspect of Hashem which is just shining Himself. He's bringing His essence to a state of revelation. It's a pure revelation of the essence. Just like will in a person is as we said a moment ago, is the revelation of your soul, not a revelation of the different parts that your soul bears. It's just the pure oneness of the soul is the will. So to Hashem's will, It's oneness. And therefore, hamshachasam lamata ba'adam hamakayim es hamitzvos, he ba'ofen de makif vehelam. And therefore, as well, it's sort of like maybe a downside, or whatever, what have you, but when they're drawn down below into the person that fulfills the mitzvahs, they stay in a way of makif and helam, meaning concealed and uninternalized. Nobody gets a mitzvah like you get it, right? Torah you can get, you can grasp, you can understand it. Mitzvah you don't understand. It's in a dimension of physicality, which is sort of, it just defies even the category of understanding, right? And so this is why. Why is that mitzvahs are in principle, they're all chukim basically, they're like just beyond comprehension, because they come from the will, which is basically a level of divinity that even when it comes down, it doesn't invest inside of things, because in its source, it doesn't even recognize the existence of anything else. So it's certainly not going to compromise itself and go into the boundaries of another thing. There is no other thing in its wake. And therefore, even when it comes down here, the other things, which is us, we have no real access to it because it doesn't come into our framework. It's the makif, it's the Orin Soph. It's basically, this is what we were saying before, it's that part of you which can tap into the will of Hashem, as opposed to the will of your animal soul. It's just like the will of your animal soul is sort of out of your hands. It just does. You see what you do, but the driving force of it, which is your will, you don't see that part. So too, when you suddenly start doing a mitzvah, you see the presentation of the halacha being performed in all of its details. But the will, which is that thing, which is driving it, you don't really see that, right? It's the underlying mover of the innermost interests of God. Sha'or da mitzvah eino nirgash ba'adam. And this is what we're saying basically. So anytime you say, I don't feel it, Rabbi, you'll know why. That the light of the mitzvah is not felt in a man. You can't feel what a mitzvah does to you. Dezeh sha'al yedei kiyum ha'mitzvahs nase zichuk ba'adam. So you say, wait a minute. If it's true that it's completely like... in your subconscious, you don't have any conscious realization of the mitzvah, then why is it that when you fulfill a mitzvah, we say that it refines the person, it refines the body? Shulachein mitzvah goreres mitzvah. And that's why, for example, we have this Mishnah, one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. It's interesting, Perush on this in general. They were saying that, there's this concept of one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. Meaning if you do a mitzvah, you'll automatically be drawn to the next one. Why is that? Because your body is refined from the performance of a mitzvah. And once your body is refined, it's ready to do another mitzvah. In other words, it draws it into a state of purity. But if according to what we're saying, right, it shouldn't, because you can't feel, have no experience of what a mitzvah does to you. Hurak pa'ulos ha'or da mitzvah. So what we're saying is that the mitzvah affects you. It's really not the mitzvah itself, it's the effect of the light of the mitzvah. In other words, just like we said a second ago, when your person is doing something, you can't see the will, but you know that the will is affecting that action. In other words, when you hit a tennis ball, it's your arm that's hitting a tennis ball, your power of movement which is hitting a tennis ball, not your will. But certainly your will is responsible for that. So it's like the effect of the will upon the other limbs. There you can sort of feel it. You can get like some kind of a ray of the will, which is what you see the effect of it is that you hit the tennis ball. So that's not the will itself. That's just sort of like the effects of the will, that you can see that the will did something. But you can't ever see the will. So too, when you feel a mitzvah, so to speak, or you have your body's refined, urging you to do the next mitzvah, it's not because you felt the will, it's because you felt the strike of the will, which basically had some effect upon you. It's like a ray, merely, of the will itself. You follow this?
So which is it? Do you feel? It seems whatever. What about a hit or mitzvah? You're saying that a mitzvah itself had you can't either do it or you don't. My question is, what's the point of saying glorifying the mitzvah? You have to, and so how can we even create the concept of you know, see what I'm getting at?
I guess there's the idea of there's the shleimus of the mitzvah and there's the beautification of the mitzvah. In other words, just if you make a birthday cake and you bring it to someone and it's basically half a cake, That's an embarrassment to the birthday boy there, right? He's like, you made me half a cake, like you might as well not made a cake. But if you make a nice cake, it's just that it doesn't have all the trimmings and all the beautiful icing and the big, sparkly coming out of it. It's still whole. It's just that you can beautify it. Same thing is true with the mitzvah. If you don't fulfill the mitzvah halachically, it's half a birthday cake. You didn't do anything. Better you didn't do it at all. It's like you didn't do it, right? But once you have it in the minimal halachic standard, you have a mitzvah. You've fulfilled the will of Hashem. But you can fulfill the will of your Father just by being yotzi, or you could do like a grand job of the matter, and that's what the idea is. Like, you're just beautifying the thing that you already have. But you have the whole will.
Yak is a good example of that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Every mitzvah can be done behidr, but okay, yeah, I'm with you.
Every mitzvah is a good example of that.
You do every mitzvah behidr. Okay, so the point being over here is that you just have an effect of the will, if you're following this conversation, and that's what you feel, which basically makes you go do another mitzvah. But the actual mitzvah is helam. It's behelam. It has to be behelam, if according to what we're saying, in concealment, because it comes from a place which doesn't recognize other existences, and therefore your existence can't recognize it. It's beyond your ability to perceive. Yeah.
I'm not sure what you mean. Alright, let's go with it.
But the actual light of the mitzvah is not felt by you at all. Only an extension of it, only a ray of it, only its effect on you. In other words, you have like a secondary realization of it, but not a primary realization of it. Does that make sense? You follow what I'm saying?
Like if you if you feel proud of doing a mitzvah, for example, like you think you're having some sort of connection with God. It's not like it's not artificial per se, but it's not like the actual thing.
Right. It's a product of the thing. Right. It comes out and sort of just like in general, the Esser Sfiros HaGenuzos come out of the Or Sovev. They're a product of the Or Sovev. Right. Mm-hmm. In other words, so we see from here the Or Sovev has the ability to sort of send a little tiny message into something which is comprehensible. But just because you're comprehending that tiny message doesn't mean you're comprehending the source of that message at all, right? Same thing here. You could have an effect from that source, but you don't get the source itself. Another example for this is basically, it's like you have the wellspring and you have the river that's accomplished by the wellspring, right? Just because you're tasting the waters of the river doesn't mean you've ever tasted from the wellspring before. Even though the wellspring is producing all the water from the river, you're not touching the wellspring. Right. This is actually one of the great chidushim of the Chassidus says, K'shiyafutzu ma'nosecha chutza, right? That Mashiach will come, the Baal Shem Tov was told by Mashiach, when your wellsprings will spread outwards. Right. And the chiddush is not just the water of the wellspring will spread outwards, but the wellspring itself will spread outwards. You'll be able to taste the source of the water in the far extensions of the river, right? So but we can't. As what we're talking about right now is that's like a miracle. Normally, you can only taste the water, not the actual thing itself. It stays in its place and it just sends a message. So too, the effect of a mitzvah on a person, which he's saying for sure there is effect. There's a mishnah to that effect. Mitzvah goder is mitzvah. Its effect is it makes you do another mitzvah. But not because you experience the thing itself, you're just experiencing the stream from it.
So what's the point of it?
Next month.
No, don't get all next life. We're Chassidim about the here and now, baby. So what is the point of it? In other words, okay, yeah?
We're saying that the effect of it is only
secondary.
It's still, we can't access the essence of it.
You access the essence of it.
We access the essence
you
of it.
You do the mitzvah, but you don't experience the essence of it. Right?
Right.
When you're doing a mitzvah, the essence of Hashem's will is mamish pulsating through you, but you have no experience of it. Just like the Orin Soph is presently pulsating through us and we have no experience of it.
When you say no experience, it pulsates. Doesn't make sense. It's a contradiction. I'm not sure what you mean exactly. You can experience, can I word it differently maybe, if I may? You can experience a part of the Orin Soph including mitzvah, but we're not, the totality of it isn't recognized by our physical body. Can we say it that way?
Okay. So you did understand.
Yeah, I just wording it because it's kind of like I don't know. I'm not saying.
All right. So bedugmas haratzon shebenefesh ha'adam. This is basically the exact thing. What's called an example of the will inside of our soul. This inyan of mitzvah. We could have said the exact same conversation regarding your own will. You cannot experience your will. right? But you certainly can have a secondary experience of your will. Anytime you see your body doing anything, it's because the will sent a river down there and like gave it a little drop to allow the arms to move or the eyes to see. But you never see your will, right? It's just like you say to a person, I can never see your soul. Say, I only see your body. Say, what do you mean? My body would be, God forbid, lying on the floor motionless if my soul wasn't in it. I can see your soul. Say, but brother, you can't see my soul. Right? So it's a weird conversation. You can ke'ilu see your soul, right? But I can never actually see your soul. It's blocked by a body. I can only ever see your body. I can only ever see the effects of your soul. I can never actually see your soul. It's the same thing with your will. It's the same thing with the mitzvah. Even though the will affects everything that goes on inside the limbs of the body, it's not like it's sovev removed. But you never see the will inside of your limbs.
So you can know it's the catalyst, but you don't see.
Exactly. That's the definition of sovev, something which is moving everything and you're unconscious and unaware of it. It's mamash God, right? God is the definition of sovev. But the chiddush of Chassidus, that God's even the definition of mamale as well, right? So we meditate on Hashem, we want to meditate on His being mamale and sovev, right? Think about just the whole thing. Ein od milvado. Umamshich ba'amaymer. Let's try and finish this one up. He goes on in the mimer, ubesiyumo, which is at the end of this mimer, which is a chelik shemevara hapasik va'ata yisrael ma'ashem elokecha shoel mimach. In other words, the pasuk of the original mimer that we're discussing, which is the one that our mimer is based on, that now Yisrael, what is Hashem asking from you, right? Ki im liyiras Hashem, where it says al tikra ma elameya, that whole business, don't read ma, but rather meya, in that part of the mimer. The end of the mimer, the Rabbi Rashab sort of wraps it up and explains the Divrei HaMaschil. He explains like this: oh, this is big. That in order that you can reveal the will of the mitzvah itself, it comes out. We're getting it. We're getting the payday. In order to reveal the actual will, who are they? Birchas mitzvahs. It's by making a blessing on the mitzvah. What's the end of a bracha in general? To draw out. So the brachas, the 100 brachas, right, that we talked about, which we said over there, and I told you would come up later, is primarily blessings on mitzvahs. Is that through the blessing on the mitzvah, the bracha of the mitzvah, it's like being mamshich, the etzem of the mitzvah, so it becomes clear and revealed. That's why we have to make 100 blessings every day. Meyahu bekeser. What is meya? Keser. Which is what? Ratzon. Right? The whole idea of this will, this level of will, represents 100. That's what the will is. The whole idea of making 100 brachas is taking that level of 100, which is essentially concealed, and when you make 100 brachas, you have the totality of it, you brought it out. Somehow. You brought out this inyan of the unseen will can sort of project itself into the reality. Al yidei meya brachas, ubefrat al yidei birchas mitzvahs, particularly through the blessings of the mitzvahs, nimshach haratzon bagilui, and it comes out. The will comes out in a revealed way. Now, of course, he says in that mimer over there, and the Rebbe doesn't say it at this point, but in the end of that mimer, he says this will really be when Mashiach comes. In other words, the idea we're going to see the will mamish, like we're going to see sovev light. Ultimately, that's really when Mashiach comes. But there is an inyan of tapping into this and actually getting some kind of a hamshacha from the sovev when you make a blessing on the mitzvah. And really, you can also make sense of it. It's not so crazy. Not necessarily you're going to see it with your eyes per se. But the idea is that when you do a mitzvah, you really are accessing Hashem's will. That's what it is. So you're busy, all of a sudden, like what you brought into this place is the true will of God. Before the mitzvah was done, you have a whole place where Hashem's will is not present here. The will is bichlal hiding behind some like projected reality which doesn't have His real will in it. So when you break the reality open by performing a mitzvah, you all of a sudden become like a beacon shining Hashem's will into this place, which is not able to be brought here unless a yid does a mitzvah. But even if you do the mitzvah without the bracha, it's still not seen. What is the bracha? It's the acknowledgement, basically. I am about to do your will. It's like turning the lights on the fact of what's happening. A yid can do a mitzvah all day long and not even realize it, right? Because as long as he's like fulfilling the halacha to the T, He gave tzedakah to the poor. He didn't mean mechaven that he's doing one of the 613 mitzvahs of Hashem. He's doing like helping an old lady across the street. He's not mechaven, he's doing one of the 613 mitzvahs of Hashem. So he's doing the mitzvah, he's bringing the will of Hashem, but it's totally absent from revelation. When he makes the bracha, he's acknowledging, he's bringing it to revelation. I'm about to bring your will into this world. So the 100 brachas is basically the presentation and the revelation of the will inside the world, which ultimately we're going to actually see it and experience. And Mashiach comes. In the meantime, it's like something like that. Okay then.
Oh, right.
Okay, but what about brachas that we don't make mitzvahs that we don't make a bracha necessarily? Like say tzedakah, or is having the kavanah that we're fulfilling the mitzvah?
I think when we say Baruch She'amar,
yeah.
we say L'Shem Yichud Kutzu Brichu Shchinte. Spartans, they say that all like before they do a lot of mitzvahs. Maybe before they give tzedakah, they say, what I'm saying? So the Baal Rebbe says we just say it once, we have in mind it's going to go on all the day. So basically there is some kind of an acknowledgement every time you do a mitzvah, there's like some bracha connected to it.
What's the line?
L'Shem Yichud Kutzu Brichu Shchinte L'Yachad L'Shem Yudke V'Vavke B'Yichud L'Shem Kol Yisrael.
And this is in Japanese?
Yeah, we say it every day before Baruch She'amar.